For me, it's mainly news and sport. That's what I watch on the BBC.
But we do like things like the trailers.
Yeah, we like the trailers.
I love the trailers. So I would be such a good trailer. I would definitely be in that, so I would. And I would love to get right to the end.
Aye.
I absolutely love Casualty, but Mammy can't. She has to look away, isn't it? You don't like the hospital dramas where I can watch them. And I love the dramas. And
even though it's joking blood, I have to look away.
I love Match It Day. I can watch it on my own TV. I can watch it on somebody else's TV. Yeah.
Well, we both like travelling a lot, so we watch
Race across the road.
Race Across the World.
MasterChef, I like MasterChef. I watch how people cook everything and then go on and make beans and toast.
I would do great on MasterChef.
You would do terrible on MasterChef.
So what would you cook?
I know what it is.
Chicken wings.
A nice Caesar salad.
And then this EastEnders, so far-fetched and dramatic, and I love that. That's when he's not watching it, but he is.
Yeah.
Closet watching.
And Mark's favourite is?
Sport and news.
Sport and news. We're all different.
And the odd murder.
I am getting a little bit concerned how many murders Mark is watching.
Oh, goodness me, yeah.
Welcome, everybody. I'm Teresa Wise. I'm Chief Executive of the Royal Television Society, and the RTS is so proud to host this really important event, and really thank you all for coming. I hope you enjoyed a flavour there of what audiences around the UK love about the BBC with Aardman's brilliant campaign. But today, we're here to focus on the BBC's future at the heart of the UK's world-leading creative industries. In particular, we're going to hear from the Director General, Tim Davie, on the role of the BBC in today's fast-changing world and how he believes it can do more for the public and the UK as a whole at an important time. Tim began as DG in September 2020 and arrived with a clear plan to focus on making sure the BBC could offer outstanding value for all audiences in the digital age. 3 years ago this month, he launched his highly ambitious Across the UK plan to shift much more of the BBC's people and decision-making power out of London in order to better reflect and represent all audiences, and also to boost the creative economy of the UK. It's been a marvellous success story, but now the pace of change in the global media market has accelerated once again. And we look forward to hearing how the BBC plans to respond. Tim Davie.
Thank you, Teresa. It's nice to be back at the home of the BBC, isn't it? And what an incredible crowd. Good morning, everybody. Today, I want to talk about us. The UK, our stories, our independence, our democracy, our media, our BBC, us. 18 months ago, I made the case that the BBC needed to embrace, not get dragged into, the interactive age. Today, I want to go a little further, and in the second half of this charter, lay out what we see as our unique role, delivering the mission to inform, educate, and entertain in a new age. A choice to focus limited resources to best serve our audiences and our society. It's a choice for all of us, and the legacy we personally leave. It's about backing a universal, independent public service, backing the UK, backing creative ambition, delivering significant reform, and harnessing technical innovation to transform the value we provide to everyone. It's an ambitious plan, not just to nurture the BBC, but to support the UK, partnering with others and growing the creative industries. It's a plan that needs your backing, editorially and financially. Now, we stand at a significant moment. The jeopardy is high. The future of the UK, democratically, socially, and culturally, is at risk. And for us to succeed, far from following where the market is driving others, we must double down on what audiences see as our unique value. Now, I count myself incredibly privileged to have lived most of my life in this country, in a democratic, peaceful society like no other. A place of unique wonders, a place where free speech thrives, where despite stresses and strains and our unceasing self-flagellation, the values that hold us together still seem a little stronger than those that force us apart, where the best of humanity, kindness, humour, decency, tolerance, can win out despite the threats. A place whose independent institutions are admired globally for their role in sustaining a civilised society. Critically, as this building attests, none of this came about by accident. It was born of deliberate intervention, clear choices about not where markets or technology would take us, but how we create an economically and creatively successful society. This success has never been about resisting change. It has been about shaping our destiny. Now is a time when we must make choices together to rapidly modernise and invest in precious institutions like the BBC, or they will wither. Now, the new world brings wonderful opportunities: global connectivity, rapid problem solving, increased transparency, to name but a few. But across the world, there are trends that present significant threats to civil society. Polarisation, noisy culture wars, disinformation, the persecution of the free press, the dramatic decline in free democracies. Many business models rationally incentivise these forces because they drive better economic return or more votes. This should concern all of us. Many of my generation have had a very good run. But what are we leaving behind? The social psychologist Jonathan Haidt talks about three major forces that bind together democracies: strong institutions, shared stories, and social capital. It's a pretty good list if you're in my job, by the way. But he argues that the social media landscape has weakened all three. It rewards division, it weakens political systems based on compromise, it stifles the constructive process of civil debate. In this country, our independent public institutions have evolved to help hold democracy together, to preserve society's equilibrium against the pull of extremes. Strong institutions foster a strong society, a virtuous cycle. That is why, when I talk about backing our national institutions, it really is not simply to mount a self-interested defence of those institutions in and of themselves. It's about intervening to provide their societal effects for future generations. This will take reform, passion, money, and vision. I am not exaggerating to say that our civil democratic society, admired across the planet, is at stake if we get things wrong. So that takes me to the BBC. There is a common refrain, one that even I have voiced in the past, that if the BBC did not exist, we would not invent it. But as I look at the world today, I think I was wrong. When I travel abroad and see what others aspire to, there is almost universal admiration for what we have achieved. It is so precious, utterly unmatched, not perfect, but trusted from Belfast to Boston, from Kendal to Kyiv. Recently, a politician said the BBC does not have a God-given right to exist. I agree. We know we have no right to exist. Complacency, defensiveness, and arrogance leaves institutions fatally distanced from those they serve. The good news is that despite the historical criticisms of the BBC as slow-moving, it really has a proven record of reshaping itself over a whole century to stay relevant through major industry changes. From the birth of TV to the first steps into the digital world, from CFAX, BBC Micro, remember those? Digital switchover, DAB, iPlayer. We have helped lead and shape change for public good. Now we must transform ourselves again to increase relevance, in a time of limitless choice and interactivity. This will not be easy. Changes in audience behaviour present deep challenges to all legacy business models, and we are not immune from that. This pressure is exacerbated by financial challenges that are built up over years, creating limited ability to deploy capital to fund long-term growth and the need to deliver major savings and trade-offs while we migrate from a broadcast to an on-demand organisation. In some ways, our strong audience and business performance continues to defy gravity and speaks to the excellence of our teams. Think Happy Valley, Blue Lights, Planet Earth 3, The Traitors, record profits for BBC Studios, the outstanding growth of iPlayer and BBC Sound, solid audience numbers. I could go on. Let's not forget the BBC is still the UK's #1 media brand. Nearly 9 out of 10 adults come to us per week, and practically everyone every month. The British public spend more time with BBC TV and iPlayer than all the big streamers combined. And we carry the UK's voice, values and influence to a weekly audience of nearly 450 million people worldwide. But we are deeply impacted by the forces reshaping the market and creating huge disruption to traditional broadcast-based organisations. And it's not just the future of the BBC and the public service broadcasters that are at stake. It's the future of our wider creative industries. A world-class success story, but one we cannot afford to take for granted. So what is the role of the BBC amidst the noise? How do we grow our value to all audiences in the new AI age? We want to focus on what we provide that is not just different to others, but is, by virtue of our public service mission, the very opposite of where many commercial players are heading. Our mission will always be to inform, educate and entertain. But what does that mean in today's society right now? We've been listening to audiences and examining societal trends to identify our role in this future landscape. That work tells us 3 essential roles that we can play for our democracy, our creative economy and our society. Roles which could make the impact of the BBC more, not less precious. Roles that are driven by audience need, not simply by commercial market forces. Our plan is to focus our resources on these roles. They are pursue truth with no agenda, back British storytelling, and bring people together. Let's have a look at these in a bit more detail. Firstly, to pursue truth with no agenda. We now live in a world, and this is shocking by the way, where over 70% of countries do not have a free press. It's shocking on our watch. Where hostile states, and we've seen a bit this week, are weaponising disinformation and using AI for democratic disruption, where algorithms monetize controversy, driven, understandably, by the necessity to secure traffic as an overriding commercial objective, where in markets like the US, the most polarising news networks have driven growth. Should we accept that it is inevitable that our media sector will become a smaller version of America? Deep polarisation, anyone? Or do we want to fight for something that is more about us and for us, the best of us, for something that is proven to help underpin democracy itself? The BBC believes in the fearless pursuit of truth anchored by the facts with no political agenda. I set impartiality as our #1 priority on taking this job, and of course it's been plain sailing ever since. The last time I was a bodyguard was, anyway, let's not go there. But it was the right decision for the organisation, and we need to hold our nerve amidst the storm. And if we think the UK environment is challenging, we have seen journalists expelled from China and Russia, and only last month we found out that colleagues in BBC Persian, shockingly, have been convicted by the Iranian authorities simply for doing their job. We must stand together against this. We must remain committed to holding our centre of gravity, staying true to our values, not as a dry, soulless choice, but as an energetic pursuit of truth. Let me give you a few examples. In news, we will, of course, continue to focus on journalism of the very highest standards and never wave from our Reithian mission. Everything is secondary to that. But we will accelerate work to ensure people can understand the facts and get an impartial assessment of the news, using technology and algorithms for good. Also, we want to make it clearer to people what we have to offer. We will double down on multimedia brands like BBC Verify and deploy it globally. We will launch 2 new brands. Firstly, a new digital destination that will offer deeper analysis, longer reads, and thought-provoking journalism, which provide more context beyond rolling news. Also, to help audiences navigate our investigative journalism, we will create a BBC Investigations brand where people can find all our content in one place. To support this, we are currently launching a new network of over 70 multimedia investigative reporters across our local bases in England. It's part of a major strengthening of our local news offer digitally, recruiting an additional 130 journalists and placing local and nations news at the heart of the BBC News app on the homepage for the first time, which is already driving impressive growth. We will proactively deploy AI on our terms, always holding onto our published principles, never compromising human creative control, supporting rights holders and sustaining our editorial standards, but proactively launching tools that help us build relevance. We are now working with a number of major tech companies on BBC-specific pilots, which we'll be deploying over the coming months. Our ambition is significant. We want to increase fact-checking of sources, use translation and reformatting technology to take our best content across media and languages, and in areas like BBC Education, we want to offer more tailored learning on services like Bite Size. This is all AI for good. Supporting this, we are developing unique ethical algorithms that dramatically increase personalisation, but are not simply driven by the narrowing of an individual's recommendations. We want to keep other factors in play, like serendipity, think the average Radio 4 day, curiosity, and an interest in what our BBC editors may judge to be important stories. Of course, alongside this, we will actively grow our services and content on social platforms, but our primary aim will be to incentivise audiences to come to the BBC, where we can guarantee provenance. Also, with the backing of BBC Studios, we will invest in stronger direct-to-consumer services globally, including relaunching BBC.com and the BBC app internationally with appropriate commercialisation. This will build our position as the #1 English online news brand online globally. Over time, we will look at adding the best of our documentaries and podcasts to that service. Now, our second role that I mentioned as the BBC will be to back the best of British storytelling. Our creative industries are a growing £125 billion success story based on a unique, globally admired system of public and commercial investment that has profited society and the UK balance sheet. But in a competitive global market, the pressure on huge international businesses to deliver efficiency creates genuine jeopardy for local IP and the telling of our stories. Now, these are the stories that UK audiences value most. In 2023, of the top 10 most viewed programmes, 100% of those stories were UK stories, 70% from the BBC. They celebrate our world-leading culture and creativity, and they document the differences that make each of our nations and communities special. Yes, in the internet, we are all exhaustingly global citizens, but I do not want to give up on our stories. On global streamers, a minority of the offer is UK content. This is not a criticism. They are very impressive companies that make many good shows. But there is no doubt that global economic models drive you to a different place editorially from a UK player. The BBC currently invests more in original British content than anyone. No one does more to champion new talent from every part of the UK. Without us, without the public service broadcasters, the scale and scope of that spending on British stories would quite simply not be replaced. The licence fee supports 14,000 external creative companies, with 50% of the economic impact outside London. The BBC is a growth and innovation fund for the UK, and we want to do even more to back British storytelling. And this is not an insular strategy. We are a global brand. But as someone who ran BBC Studios, I can tell you that our most successful approach is to focus on our point of difference. Authentic British stories produced beautifully, not worrying too much about an abstract notion of global appeal. So what does that look like in terms of our offer to audiences? In the UK, our commissioning will be focused on harnessing the very best creative talent from right across the UK. We will continue to shift significant amounts of content production, more editorial leadership and decision-making away from London. More than 60% of our TV production will be outside London by 2026, and 50% of our radio music by 2027. We will build on our successful work of forming major partnerships with regional and national bodies. It is not just about BBC departments moving, but about shifting hundreds of millions of pounds which flow into the wider economy. We have no desire to create BBC islands, but rather to act as a catalyst, as benign venture capital. If the 12% GVA represented by the creative industries in London was replicated elsewhere, we would double the value of the sector. It's amazing. The BBC can be a major driver in closing that gap. For instance, we will deliver projects such as our new hub in Digbeth, and we're working with writer Stephen Knight and his Digbeth Lock studio, relocating strands like MasterChef. We will also continue to relocate programmes such as News at 1 to Salford, which complements the work we have done on locating network news teams across the UK. We will build on our work in the nations and regions, supporting initiatives such as the recently announced Northern Corridor Growth Plan. Critically, within the BBC, you can now build a career through to a very senior level, such as a network news editor, without even coming to London. Linked to this, we'll work very hard to keep opening up the organisation and the industry to all, which remains a big issue. We are setting a lead with our lower socio-economic target of 25% of the organisation, and despite significant pressure on costs, we'll continue with our target of hiring 1,000 apprentices, which brings a lot of joy, by the way. We will simplify and strengthen all our talent schemes, such as BBC Introducing, and build one of the world's most ambitious and biggest media talent development programmes. That means doing even more to find and champion creative potential and offer clear routes to performing on the pyramid stage or writing primetime drama. Our third and final role will be a focus on bringing people together. All of us are increasingly consuming global content on platforms driven by algorithms that create the most commercially potent relationship with the customer. These algorithms can create a very narrow version of personalisation, threatening social cohesion. In this world, shared moments and common cultural experiences are becoming more, not less, precious. People are increasingly drawn to those communal moments, to places where they find hope and joy, where they're able to have a civil discussion, where they can laugh together, not defined solely by political beliefs or by their online purchase history. As we move to an internet-only world, we can shape this tipping point to act for the benefit of the British public. We can choose not to rely solely on US and Chinese tech companies who may not have the interests of a shared British culture and our democratic, tolerant society at their heart. This will require us to create unique algorithms to serve our values for good. Algorithms and AI that bring us closer, not drive us apart. Personalisation, of course, but not driven by a narrow commercial return. So what does bringing people together look like for audiences? Of course, it means that we will, despite budget pressures, prioritise big national occasions, from the coronation, Eurovision, the proms, Glastonbury, to the Olympics and the Euros, or Strictly or Gladiators, Children or Need, or even that great drama, Election Night. Linked to this, we will be expanding and improving our live offer as something that sets us apart. So you'll see much more live streams and content on our services, allowing you to connect communally to shared experiences in real time. We will build the BBC as a place where more people can come together to debate and share views constructively. In the forthcoming local elections, we will for the first time host mayoral debates in every combined authority and expand our hot seat feature on local radio, where leaders are held to account by the public. And we are also making significant changes to BBC Online. We will create a fully integrated and sensibly personalised service that allows us to connect up the BBC rather than simply offering it up as a set of different products. This involves a dramatic change in how the BBC works. Now, we have done very well, I think, I'm a loaded witness, on limited resources to be one of the only non-US media companies to have scale in video through iPlayer or audio via sounds, alongside market-leading sport, weather and news services. But we have not fully unlocked the power of this multimedia offer to audiences. A BBC of the future will complete the journey from a broadcaster-controlled to a more audience-controlled future. With this in mind, we have been undertaking a total rewiring of the data and the horizontal systems, such as search, that underpin our online offer. In the future BBC, you'll be able to move across the content seamlessly, not limited by media type. If you're interested in a topic, you should be able to easily mine the whole BBC, from archives to live output, audio, video, world service, local. We have already rapidly built to over 20 million UK weekly accounts in the last few years, and we want to push on to ensure a minimum of 70% of adults are getting this value online weekly. Finally, bringing people together means making sure no one is left behind in the digital transition. This spring, we're on track to launch, alongside other public services, a free TV service, Freely, to deliver live TV over broadband. Beyond this, we intend to use technology to step change the accessibility of our content, another exciting area for new technology. We want to be a world leader setting new standards in supporting people with disabilities. There is significant potential, and we're looking at ideas such as how we could offer automatic subtitles on all podcasts to help those who are hearing impaired, or transform the range of our audio description. There's actually loads of possibilities here. So all of the above represents an ambitious plan of innovation based on 3 clear roles for the BBC. Pursue truth with no agenda, back British storytelling, and bring people together. But before I close, I want to deal with the obvious elephant in the room, which is the money. Specifically, what will we be doing in the short term to fund change and cope with budget pressures? And what do we need to do to ensure we make the right choices to fund a universal public service longer term? Below inflationary settlements have chipped away at our income over many years and have put serious pressure on our finances. At least we now have an inflation-linked agreement until the end of the Charter, which is good news. But this comes on the back of a 30% cut in real terms between 2010 and 2020, and a tough couple of years of flat funding. This is particularly problematic as a strong balance sheet and the ability to deploy capital strategically is essential if we are to navigate digital transition. To strip money from the BBC during this period has been particularly short-sighted. This has led us to deploy very significant reforms and cuts in the last 3 years in order to preserve value for licence fee payers. Reducing our public service headcount by over 1,800, cutting over 1,000 hours of content, including many loved programme titles, confronting trade-offs like creating a single news channel operation, while driving commercial income very hard. In future, we must continue to be highly active in attracting investment and redeploying money internally, as well as making savings. Firstly, we will utilise commercial partnerships much more actively in areas like programming and technology to increase our firepower. Our recent deal with Disney on Doctor Who is a good example of how we can work to deliver more value through third-party funding, while protecting content for UK audiences. Also, we will need to work more strategically with the best tech companies to co-create solutions and form business partnerships that save money, inject capital, and create better products. We will also continue to aggressively grow BBC Studios internationally, building our production capabilities and direct-to-consumer services like BBC.com and now the wholly owned BritBox. We aim to double studios in 5 years to deliver over 3.2 billion in revenues by 27-28. We will move more areas into BBC Studios where there is a competitive market for talent, and it does not negatively impact in the UK, services in the UK. After moving some of BBC audio production this year, we are now evaluating areas such as BBC monitoring. We will continue to create a leaner, more agile public service BBC. We are already well on our way and nearly done in delivering 500 million of annual savings to fund digital investments and cope with historic licence fee settlements. We are now working on plans for a further 200 million, which will be primarily deployed on ensuring we can deliver enough impactful content and ensure investment in digital products. As part of this, we will accelerate our content spend towards streaming value and away from broadcast-only output. We will deliver more value for younger audiences by focusing all our commissioning, marketing and social media activity on BBC iPlayer, with BBC Three's linear channel curating the best of that offer. One area that we will discuss with government is the World Service. It is uniquely valuable and globally important, particularly in light of the trends that I talked about earlier. However, we cannot keep asking UK licence fee payers to invest in it when we face cuts to UK services. We will need to discuss long-term funding solutions for the World Service that come from central government budgets. Even in the short term, we will need more help. Russia and China are investing hard. Not properly funding one of the UK's most valuable soft power assets makes no sense, economically or culturally. Finally, what is the licence fee? Of course, the first order question is, how can we best secure all the benefits of a universal public service media organisation for our democracy, our creative economy and our society? I often think people discuss funding in the abstract without linking it to the content it would provide. Any commercialisation inevitably shapes the editorial content that it funds. There is no doubt that the market has changed hugely since the licence fee was introduced. And I think it is right to ask fundamental questions about its longevity in a world that is now full of so much choice. But we should be appropriately cautious about unpicking a multi-genre BBC that leads the market rather than is simply about market failure. We should not create another commercial walled garden or a narrow BBC that provides a niche service for the most hardcore users. The very wonder of the BBC is that quality news sits next to genres such as drama and sport, thus ensuring widespread engagement. This is a precious ecosystem. And we already have a hybrid BBC in the UK as we monetize our archive on platforms such as UK TV. However, we are not defensive about the future. We will need reform. With that in mind, we will proactively research how to reform the licence fee post-2028, looking at its scope, how it could be more progressive, and making sure its enforcement is fair and proportionate. And of course, as part of this, we will engage with the work being done by government to review BBC funding. But as ever, our most important relationship is with our owners, the UK public. So starting next year and well ahead of the new charter, we will open up our biggest ever consultation process so that the public can inform and drive the debate on the future of the BBC. Our aim is to make contact and get feedback from hundreds of thousands of people, and we do so with an open mind. In conclusion, I talked about this being a moment of choice. Back when the BBC began, John Reith could have chosen to chase the money and form a commercial radio business and make a pretty good living flogging people wirelesses. But instead, as a country, we recognise the incredible power of this new communications tool. And we made a choice to harness it in the public interest by establishing a universal, independent BBC. Today, a new wave of technological and societal change is reshaping our media landscape at extraordinary speed. It is bringing fresh challenges for our democracy, our creative economy, and our society. It's time to make a choice again, for everyone, for each of us personally, a decision to intervene again, to stand up and champion for the UK and all of us, to serve, not to accept that only the forces of the global market will prevail, to champion an institution that is admired worldwide and is needed more now than ever. Not simply defending the BBC, but fighting for what it makes us, to pursue truth with no agenda, to back British storytelling, to bring us together, to act with urgency, to shape this new era of rapid technological change for the good of all and for the UK as a whole. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Martha Kearney, presenter on the Today programme. I'm going to be talking to Tim about the speech, huge amounts to cover there. We're going to end at 11:30, so I'll chat to Tim for about 10 minutes, then we'll open it up for questions. And I should say, when it comes to that stage, do wait for the microphone, because this is being streamed and people will be able to hear you better. Well, a great deal to get into. Before we get on to the thorny questions of funding and savings and so on, I did want to ask you about the bigger picture. And this idea that you said at the outset of the speech, the future of the UK is at risk democratically, socially, culturally. That's quite a claim, and quite a claim also that the BBC can be part of the solution to some of those issues.
Yeah, and you don't want to overstate the role of the BBC itself, but all I would say is look at the data globally. Look at the trend lines. Look at the trend lines on free press. Look on the trends in terms of democracies, free democracies. I just think it's a red alert on those numbers. And I think we don't want to take, I think you can often take things for granted. I talked about, I am feeling this, which is someone we've had a good run, our generation. We've had a situation in which we have lived in a peaceful society. We've taken things for granted. And I just think the history of humanity is not to take those things for granted. And I worry about it. And I think those risks are real. I don't want to overstate the BBC's claim, but I do think independent institutions, independent of politics, although the way the political system is set up is critical, of course, in that regard, but independent institutions, time and time again, proven to be an essential counterweight to something that is purely about politics. I think that's really important.
But does the BBC still have that kind of place in our national life at a time of when the media environment has changed so hugely from when it was founded?
Almost remarkably, yes, it does. I mean, I think we count ourselves out much too quick. I mean, I'll give you some numbers. I can give you the BBC stats. Yeah, but we still hit it. That healthy paranoia that pervades the BBC, which I want the BBC to be utterly focused on audiences and serving audiences. But yeah, every day I look at how many people are using the BBC. And as I said, nearly, close to 90% of people, last week I think it was 86%, because I look at the number, of people use the BBC. And, a bit of in my madness a little bit is I still find it amazing that, if we move one bit of programming around, it's front page news, because people care. People care. And, we still are at the centre of British life, and we're delivering big numbers. And yeah, I'm very proud of it.
And do you think those big numbers will continue? Because we're not in an era where 20 million people sat down to watch Morecambe and Wise on a Saturday night.
Yeah, you've got to reconstruct fundamentally, and I talked about what online can do for us. You've got to fundamentally reconstruct how you get value from the BBC, and that over time, I don't think you're going to have necessarily as many hours with people. I mean, we've got people, some of them doing 70 plus hours a week with the BBC. It's what I dream of, sitting in a greenhouse listening to Radio 4 all day. That I think is clearly under pressure. You're going to have but value is not just a function of time. It's also something that, if you may have 3 or 4 we've always had a few news sources. We've always read papers that have a particular angle or things. I've got no gripe with that. But the BBC sitting alongside that, somewhere you can go for trusted news, somewhere you can go to different types of programming. The fact we have listed sports events means that we come together I can't wait for the Euros. Come on, Wales, yeah? It's a big night tonight. But seriously, those things hold us together. And I think, we'll still have a massive place, that it becomes more valuable. I sat with, members of my family I don't see very often because they live a completely different life. They're watching the final of Traitors, and that was precious. And we're seeing that. We're seeing that come through.
And what about the kind of future that you've been talking about? There's a dilemma for the BBC, isn't there, which Mark Damazer kind of outlined on the Today programme this morning, which is you're criticised for being lazy, not being entrepreneurial enough, and yet you expand commercially and you're accused of being an elephant trampling over people. But there are a lot of criticisms about the way the BBC is moving into the commercial landscape. Again, Phil Riley on Today talked about there being a finite pot of money. He was talking about the plan to have advertising around podcasts on different platforms.
Yeah, I think, firstly, the good news is, by the way, I can confirm to Mark Damazer that Kellogg's will not be advertising on BBC One. But we absolutely need to be careful. We need to be careful and appropriate in how we develop commercial revenue. And I'd say there's 2 things in my mind when I say that. The first is we absolutely want to protect a commercial-free offer in the UK at all costs. And I made this point, I just don't think we talk enough about it. We talk about the funding, but not enough about editorially. If immediately you start, I'm sure where I live in Henley, people will pay a subscription. But that's not what we'd suddenly start making for a certain audience. And I don't want to do that. The joyous torture of this job is it's kind of completely weird versus having a commercial environment where you're trying to monetize. I talked about narrowing algorithm. You're trying to extract money from your target audience. Our target audience is everyone, and that brings stresses and strains as we try and bring everyone in. And sometimes it feels like a really tough cause, but it's absolutely worth the pain. So that's the first thing. So the first thing is we absolutely do not want to be a commercially funded UK offer. I think that's having said that, where we can properly monetize around that, where we can create capital, we can attract capital, we can do joint ventures with Disney, we can monetize some of our archive in the UK. I think that's appropriate. And I'm very bullish
even
about
when
it.
you're meeting resistance from local newspaper owners who describe the BBC as a neighbour from hell.
Yeah, well, you get different descriptions from various media owners. And I do believe, when I was working the radio market, I was very, very keen to open up DAB, for instance. And I use it as an example because I think the BBC absolutely must be part of growing the overall industry. I listen very hard to those people who say, I don't think the BBC should be crowding out. It should actually be stimulating. Now, I would humbly suggest that the trend lines for the local press around the world are under enormous pressure, and the BBC is not the key contributing factor. I think the more interesting question is how we could help the local press. We're already working with the local Democracy Reporters Service. We're already doing lots of links to other bits. So I would be hoping, I do take that criticism, by the way. I don't just push it back. I am very interested in growing the overall market where it is not a zero-sum game if we work together with commercial providers to grow the market. We've done it with ITV and Channel 4 with Freeview. This Freely product we're coming up with, platform, is outstanding news. I won't blow their cover, but they're working. I think there's a few people here would be grumpy if I did in terms of some of the partnerships we can develop. That's really good news for the public service broadcast. So the answer to your question is get market growth. And I want market growth. The BBC should not just be shutting out competition. That's the last thing I want to do.
And you talked about commercial partnerships. They want Doctor Who and Disney, but also with technology companies. And what are you planning there?
Well, I'm worried because I think one of the things that we don't have is, I talked about the balance sheet, but if you talk to the tech titans and you talk to media companies in the US, they're under pressure. The one thing they'll say is you do need deep pockets to compete. And I think we do need major global partnerships with some of the tech players where we can bring an enormous amount. We're an incredibly good testing ground. We are innovative. We can pilot things that maybe others can't develop. We've always had that history, but I don't think we can do it alone as a kind of walled garden of R&D development. We're going to have to work with big companies. We've done this for a while. You think about natural history and BBC Studios, a lot of that natural history, some of the finest work in the BBC has been developed through partnership with the majority of funding coming from outside the UK's boundaries. So I think we need to push that into other areas to attract capital to create joint businesses of which the UK and the UK shareholders as through the public service can benefit. I could see us on our own. I don't think we're going to be doing, I just don't think we'll have enough firepower.
But the more successful you are commercially, don't you end up undermining the arguments for a license fee because will it become less necessary?
Yeah, I'd love to really have that problem. Because one of the joyous kind of things about this is, and this is where I get marginally dangerously talking down to people, which is have a look at the economics, because the wonders of a universal fee is you do get that money. The collection cost is manageable, and you can spend it on the Today programme, Martha, you'll be pleased to hear, and Radio 4 Strands, other Radio 4 Strands. So, and you don't have to make a commercial return, and that model does what I was talking about in the speech. If you were trying to fund that, there's no one who would be more pleased to say we've got a £50 billion business which doesn't need any reinvestment and can be used to fund a public service broadcaster. If you can find that model for me, then I'm all ears, because I just want to serve the British public. That currently doesn't exist, because a competitive margin for a commercial business at 10 to 15% or whatever the number you'd want is not going to fund the kind of things we're talking about in any way, shape or form. Now, having said that, it can be massively helpful to increasing the value of what you get by creating Doctor Who, creating other things. So it has a fundamental effect on increasing the value and allowing us to cope in this age, but it's not going to fully, no one's more bullish than I am in terms of protecting public service, but trying to find commercial income, but it's not going to fully replace this precious thing I've talked about.
And you've talked about engaging with the governments looking at a future of licence fee at the moment, and you talked in your speech about the idea of that being more progressive. So are you looking towards a model where there would be means testing for the licence fee?
No, I think all I'm saying is I think there are appropriate questions the fee needs reform, in my view. It's precious, and be careful. I'll be careful what I say, because I think you have to be very cautious. But I think it's right that the BBC board with the executive are looking at how could you, what concessions? We have concessions at the moment. People on pension credit of a certain age get a free licence. Should we stop there? What could we do? What are the other options? That doesn't necessarily imply means testing. There could be a number of ways you could make it progressive. I just think the idea we just sit with where we're at is the wrong one. Having said that, I do think a universal fee where everyone has a stake in this. Now, you could say funded by general taxation, but another wonder of this job, there are many, is that actually I feel curiously accountable. When I take a train ride, people know this, one of my old cliches, is I just look at every flat in every house. I've got £159. £159. I feel the need to offer that value. And I think that direct connect, we are curiously, weirdly accountable to the British public for that value. And I think that connection is really important, and it keeps the BBC on its toes in a way, which I think is really helpful.
Okay, at that point, I want to open it up. We've got time for a few questions before we end at 11:30. So please wait for a microphone. Yes, we've had the lady there, thank you. If you say where you're from as well.
Hey, Tara.
Hi, Tara Conlan. I write for The Guardian, the RTS broadcast. You very eloquently laid out in the speech there, Tim, the principles that you're going to abide by. But at what point do you think, when you're talking about being commercial with a conscience and fair and effective competition, at what point, what percentage do you think you cross the Rubicon that between commercial and public service? And also, Andy Harris said last week that Keir Starmer is not offering a clear view of the BBC's future? Obviously, this speech today helps him out there, but what are you doing to help with that?
Well, I think, let's do the last. I mean, I think I've laid out my stall, and I look forward to constructive conversations with all politicians. Other cliches are available on that one. I don't see it in the way you see it in terms of, sorry, that awful answer of rephrasing the question. The commercial arm can expand enormously. It could be 10 times the size, being provocative. But the critical thing is protecting the funding for the UK public service and the world service to do something that is absolutely driven by the values I've talked about. So it's not a percentage. It's not. It is, you know, frankly, I mean, we're a huge global brand, but at nearly 6 billion revenues, we are a small fish in the trillion-dollar entity, shark-infested waters, otherwise known as the global media market. I mean, I recommend a bubble chart to have a look at it. You know, I mean, we are small, so we can grow enormously. I mean, we've got BBC Studios executives in the room looking pale as I say this, because I'd like to get it, you know, a lot more. So there's no percentage. I mean, our revenue could be much bigger. I mean, one thing I would say is our plan is a growth plan. I mean, people always talk about managing decline, but actually, yeah, if Studios is doubling its size, our overall revenues can grow. But the worrying thing underneath that is, can we protect the UK public service free from commercial interference in the way I think it should be? That's the game.
Okay, yep.
Hi, Tim.
Hi. Hi, John.
It's a very good book, which is available afterwards. It's interesting that when you mentioned the licence fee, the tech went wrong. Do you think you made a very good case for it?
Sorry, I don't understand the question.
The tech
John.
went wrong when you mentioned the licence fee. It just didn't work on the screen.
There are certain things I control. That wasn't one of them. So. And thank you for the book. The John Mayer book on funding is available. So, sorry, have you got a question on the substance?
My question is, did you make a good case for the licence fee?
Well, I think what I was hoping to do, that's in some ways that's only a judgment you can make as the audience. But what I was hoping to do was make an overwhelming case for a public service that is here to perform the roles I talked about. And to do that, I do believe you need public funding and universality and independence, John. And you and I have had this conversation many times, is I am less obsessed by the precise mechanic of scope or wholly defending the licence fee as it stands. I've said we need to reform it. What I am obsessed about is the fight. Everyone who works for the BBC chooses to work to fight for universal, independent, public service broadcasting. And I think that's very hard to achieve if commercialisation is the thing at the centre of your model. I just can't see that. So hopefully I made a case for that. I've also said that the most important people to talk to are the public, and we will be talking to hundreds of thousands of them. And I think we are open-minded on where we take that.
Hi there, Jason Mansoray, Sky News. You talked about getting new local investigative reporters in, I think you said 70, and also covering all the mayoral elections.
Election debates, yeah.
Debates as well. And it's a huge investment, so it's a twofold question. One is, how are you going to afford that when you're talking about the real-time cuts you've had? But also, obviously, as a commercial broadcaster, how is it fair to compete with that for us? Because, you know, it would be very hard for a commercial broadcaster to afford that kind of investment.
Sure. On the first question is we've broadly kept money flat in local and regional, but we've taken some incredibly painful cuts in terms of sharing local radio programming, as many will know in the room, in the afternoon. So in terms of, many in this room will be very aware of the pain we've gone to in rewiring, sorry, corporate term, but moving money to areas where we believe we need to be in terms of the digital world, in terms of local reporting and investigative journalism. I think one of the things we've learned is we are there. I mean, you know, I think Sky and the BBC are both strong together in the UK market and keeping, I mean, I've got huge admiration for Sky, do a brilliant job. But working together, we grow a vibrant news market. We're not taking ad pounds out of the market, and that's really important.
I would love to see more competition on the ground. The issue is I don't think the BBC being there or not is the defining factor there. It's whether there's enough, frankly, advertising income. And we're not in that market. So for you, I don't want to, that's the Sky question, is there enough commercial revenue to make a model work? And I don't think the BBC is the deciding factor in that, actually, in terms of you look around what we've learned over the years.
I think we can squeeze in one last question there.
Peter York, writer. Tim, you talked about engaging with the government. How do you engage with a government which has been unremittingly hostile to the BBC over the last 14 years and has proved it by its actions and is the author of most of your money troubles?
I think, Peter, you and I have had this conversation a few times, actually. I think I've been very clear in the speech that I think it was not the right decision to do below inflationary settlements, particularly in the 2010 to 2020 period. I do recognise that now for 4 years we do have inflation, which is good news. So this is a balanced, constructive discussion, I would say. The one thing I would say is we have, regardless of political party, kept the BBC as a public service broadcaster with a universal intervention with the licence fee. And I'm very grateful for that. And that's important. That overall support is the really big picture. I am not glossing on the fact that, as I've said, being very clear, I think there's big mistakes around the World Service and some of the settlements are not to my liking. But I think that is the big picture. I think the real thing I need to see is support across the political parties for a properly funded BBC in the way I've talked about. And that's what we've got to try and get to going forward. Final thing, I would say, be careful about ascribing all the financial problems to politicians. We also have to make sure that we are justifying the licence fee to every household through usage. Yeah, if you're on a tight budget in a household, this room may be quite convinced by the public role of the BBC, but value for all means you have to do your work to make sure that that value is actually delivered in a thing called programmes, not just speeches. So part of what we've got to do, Peter, is, and this is where it's very difficult in a polarised world, there's some brilliant presenters in the room who are working really hard and get this. They have to bring everyone in. And I think, we're in a hyper-competitive market. If you had 2 out of 4 TV channels, you didn't have to work that hard to get scale. We have to work hard to keep that relationship. And in some ways, I worry more about that than any of the politics, as long as we're within a certain zone, bluntly.
And one final question from me, because I know we focused a lot on BBC and its external relationships. I know a lot of my colleagues will be listening to what you have to say very, very carefully, who've already been through rounds of cuts, savings, as you might say. Are there more on the way? Are there more job losses on the way?
There'll be more. Very specifically, I've been but it is proportionate. So, and I know this is always, because we are in a world of change, and I know across the BBC people know this. We have to reshape from a traditional broadcast organisation. The 500 million I talked about, we've done a remarkable job. I mean, without impacting too many audience services, we've managed to find we're pretty much 80% of that done, which is a remarkable achievement. And people say to me, "Oh, well, what are you cutting?" And I go, "Well, we're down by 1,800 people. We've taken 1,000 hours out. These have been incredibly painful, cuts. We'll have to do more, but the challenge is slightly less over the forthcoming period in that we've gone through that 500. We've now got about 200. Most of that 200 is not a result of funding settlements, most of it. Most of it is a choice by us deliberately to put money into digital service, because we have to make sure we're competitive in the new world, not just hanging. So often we're changing money, we're working money through from one place to another, like we talked on local. We will have to make some more of those changes. And I think the public service constantly has to justify itself in being lean and competitive. What you've got to do in my job is make sure you're protecting what's unique about the BBC in terms of its production talent, its journalism. All those things have to be protected through that. And we are privileged. We've got a licence fee and some security of income, which I know for some of the commercial business in the room will not be the same.
Okay, well, on that note, huge amount of food for thought, provoke a lot of debate and discussion, I'm sure, afterwards in this room as well. But Tim Davie, Director General of the BBC.
Thank you very much. Thank you.